So, when it comes to the professional standards that we're all working towards, basically, what we've got here are a list of seven, I suppose, categories of standard, right? And they come in a very specific order. And so the one we're looking at is standard number 3, plan for and implement effective teaching and learning. But as Joy has been saying, actually, it's really foundational to understand the students first and how the students are going to be learning. And that's pretty much the reasoning behind why standard number 1, know students and how they learn, is placed first in this categorization. And then the second standard, knowing the content and how to teach it, obviously builds upon understanding the students so that we can plan and implement our effective teaching and learning.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Pauline. And, we just wanted to go back momentarily to these domains, if you like, or specific standards, because there is a reason why they're structured in that particular way. And as you said, even though we're looking at specifically 3.3 today, we need to go back and just remind ourselves that there's a 1 and a 2. And can we say at this stage, Pauline, with the pre-service teachers that we have at UTS, no one is doubting for 1 minute that they don't have the knowledge, the content knowledge.
Yeah, no, that's right.
And if they didn't, obviously they wouldn't be here. So there is no doubt in terms of you bringing the content knowledge with regard to professional knowledge. But what we don't know when we first start, whether it's our practicum or once we start our teaching vocation, we don't know our students. And that's something that is absolutely foundational, that we must take time to really understand our students. And once you understand the students, and that's part of the professional knowledge, then it makes the next domain, the professional practice, so much more meaningful and effective. So we just wanted to draw people's attention here that even though we're looking at the third domain today, we just wanted to remind you the importance of the professional knowledge, particularly in relation to knowing your students.
So what you've got here is a kind of graph, I suppose, that shows how different learning styles might influence how you teach your content. So do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, and I think too, Pauline, what's in this particular, on this particular slide, I don't think it's new to anyone, but we just need to be reminded of it. And more importantly, we just need to make sure as part of our planning and the daily execution in our classrooms, that we continually remind ourselves that we do have students who learn better by seeing something. There are students who learn better by hearing something. There are those students who prefer to read and to write. And there are those who like to be engaged. They like to actually go on with the particular activity that you give them.
I would have thought that most people are a mix, and there are different levels of, I suppose, identification with each of these categories.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I always, and without sort of spending time here, and it's not the purpose of today's lecture, that'll be unpacked in obviously the weeks ahead, but we just again draw people's attentions to different strengths and weaknesses. And we're not saying these are the only types of learning or learners that we will have in the classroom. But we tried to just sort of narrow it down to 3 or 4 of the common ones. And it's the visual, the auditory, the kinesthetic, and obviously read and write. And can I say, whilst there's going to be different students who gravitate to different learning styles, I always in my teaching make this assumption that every child wants to see, every child wants to hear, every child needs to read, and every child needs to be able to write. And it's part of what we do as teachers in terms of, getting our students to be able to write and to read, the literacy and the numeracy aspect of it. And every child likes to be involved, the learning by doing. And if we can, in our strategies, whatever they may be, in your respective discipline, try and embed these 4 for every one of your students. Now, they might be highlighted with some students a bit more than others, but that's once you understand your learner. But I'd like to think that in our practices, every child gets to experience all four in every lesson, within every activity. And I'll just give you a very simple example. If, for example, I'm about to get students engaged in an activity that's going to take about 15 or 20 minutes, I would do a couple of things. One, I would make sure the students hear what it is that they're going to do. So I will stand at the front of the room. When I have complete silence and attention, I will go ahead and say, now, this is what I would like you to do. But at the same time, I will have it there for them to see it. Now, it might be on the blackboard. It might be in a PowerPoint on one of the slides. It might be on an A4 bit of paper that I will then hand to every child to have in front of them. At the same time, I get them to go ahead and engage with that activity. Every child. And then there's always that element when we need to consolidate. And if we are consolidating and doing something at the end, once we finish that activity, we might get students to read something, whether it's from a textbook or somewhere else for that matter, it doesn't matter. We then get them to write something down, because we all at the end of the day need to be able to read, we need to be able to write, and we need to be numerate. But at the same time, what helps that is certainly making sure when we consider our activities within a lesson and those multiple activities that I'll talk about in a minute, make sure you consider the visual aspect, the auditory aspect, and certainly the hands-on aspect. And those 3-4 elements working together are going to make sure and enhance certainly the quality of your teaching and learning.
Lovely. So actually, when you're talking about teaching and learning, there's different ways to categorize what's going on, right? And there is this component that is the teacher teaching, with the class being quiet and watching, and then the students doing their various things, and you're going around and helping. So you want to speak to how they all combine to make a lesson?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, a reason for this slide is just to remind pre-service teachers, these 3 key fundamental roles that should happen in every lesson. And can I say, just drawing on my experience, 20 years of teaching, I have seen lessons, and can I say, I have done this myself at times, but then as part of being the reflective teacher, you realise pretty quickly that this is not the right approach. And, with experience comes the knowledge of knowing how to configure these 3 aspects together to make it so much more powerful and meaningful when we talk about teaching and learning. And I've had lessons myself, particularly early on in my career, where I would do most of the teaching. And then on reflection, that really wasn't the most effective way. Now, we're not saying there's not going to be times in a lesson where you are doing the explicit teaching. That does need to take place. But we just need to be mindful that we are not doing that for the duration of a lesson. The next one is the independent learning. There must be time given in a lesson, and I would argue for every activity within a lesson, where the students work on their own. Even if it's only for a minute or two to reflect on what it is that was done, whether something the teacher had said or whether something that they've learned by working in a group situation, they need to be given a couple of minutes just to note something down, obviously on an individual level.
Actually, that's really interesting, because giving them the opportunity to do something on their own helps, I think, to sort of form their thoughts for when they're in their group situation. They've got something that they understand internally so that they can contribute to the group.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I've seen, Pauline, lessons where the whole lesson was student-centered. And can I say, again, early in my teaching career, I may have actually did that myself, and I'm sure I did, where I would walk into the class, draw their attention to a few pages of a textbook, and then I would say, go ahead and read those 2 pages and then answer the review questions. But on reflection, that's really not effective classroom practice. There's better ways, in my opinion, in our opinion, that can be done. But again, we need to make time during the course of a lesson where the students are working independently. And then the third thing, and again, I would argue that every 60-minute lesson, or it doesn't really matter what the duration of the lesson is, should have an opportunity where the students are engaged with their peers, with others. Now, how you manage the group situation, that's completely up to you, and you will learn about different strategies in terms of group work, again, in the weeks ahead. But certainly, we sometimes underestimate how much students can learn from each other. Can I also say, and no shame in saying this, sometimes when I've explained something in the past to my students, there's students who quite didn't understand what it is that I was trying to say. However, when it was one of their fellow students who actually explained it to them in a language that they can understand, they started to understand what it is that I was trying to say at the beginning. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. That is using or working with the students to strengthen the teaching and learning within the environment. And if you as a teacher think that you're the only one who can impact on teaching and learning, maybe we should revisit and have a think about that. You know, we as teachers, as facilitators, whatever term you want to use, we want to make sure we have that classroom environment where we're getting students to work and to learn from each other. They can learn sometimes as much from each other as they learn from us. So basically, Pauline, just with this slide is to remind our pre-service teachers, as part of their planning and the execution of any lesson, think about what you're going to be doing, think about those opportunities the students will work on their own, and think about those opportunities when they work together. But I'll finish by saying all 3 should be happening concurrently. Even when the students are working independently or in groups, the teacher is doing something. And that something is walking around the class, engaging, doing the formative assessment and seeing what they're doing, modifying, and so forth. So those 3 things are absolutely critical. Those 3 roles, I should say, are absolutely critical to, you know, what we do in our 60-minute lesson.
Actually, that thing you were saying about the students learning from a peer, I think the person who's doing the explaining is getting so much out of that experience because, of course, if you can teach something without confusing yourself, then you actually know that you've got it, which is, you know, amazing for the student who's actually in the position of being the teacher.